Hey, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay, just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. I hope you are all doing well and lovely on this beautiful day. If it's beautiful where you are, I think currently right now outside it is kind of craptacular by me. It's cold and rainy, and we're supposed to be getting hit with that cold blast that's coming through. Yeah, so let's get right into the meat of this episode, okay? I'm going to give you the meat and I'm going to give it to you raw. Um in doing this, I've come to the conclusion that sooner or later a lot of the things that I'm telling you guys are going to be coming down the pipe in terms of the mainstream media and how it handles the Rings of Power and tries to hype it up and attacks on Tolkien and his work directly or on Peter Jackson's adaptations. Um, well, I came across an article that literally says the quiet part. It's sort of, I guess, intentionally, or maybe they didn't realize the full scope of it, but sort of says what the ultimate goal is, right? Um, where they lay it out like the way they want this to work, right? So let's get right into it. Let's take a look. This is coming to us from Collider, okay? And it says the Rings of Power changes the way we watch the Lord of the Rings. How do the Second Age stories affect the first? Right? And then the big Rings of Power little gobbledygook there, right? And logo, whatever. And it says Amazon's Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power series quickly became one of the streaming service's most popular series. Though the show doesn't directly follow the plot of a particular novel, it builds off of the work of J.R.R. Tolkien. Yes, much like I, in writing my name on a piece of paper, am, following in the footsteps of, the great literary giants like Shakespeare, because they wrote, I'm writing, and they're connected. Um, starting with Tolkien's established fan starting with Tolkien's established fan base could only help the show as it brings fans into Middle Earth. But The Rings of Power is not the first time people have entered the fictional world through the screen. Tolkien's works have been adapted many times, but the most famous is Peter Jackson's film series. The Rings of Power introduces many characters who appear in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit films. But the show isn't directly connected to the films. Though the show seems to have aimed for a similar look to the films, it has a different creative team and is not officially tied to any previous interpretation of Middle-earth. Yet, as both are adapted from the same source material, the two stories fit together fairly well. It's easy to imagine them being in the same world. With the Rings of Power taking place long before the events in the films, there is room for some inconsistency without it being painfully distracting. And by providing backstories for central characters like Gandalf, Elrond, and Sauron, the show can enhance rewatches of Jackson's films. Gandalf's Mysterious History. The series took its time in revealing the stranger's, Daniel Wyman's, identity. While the name Gandalf has yet to be used, it is heavily implied that the stranger is the same wizard from The Lord of the Rings, with direct quotes from the character and a focus on his relationship with Middle-earth's smallest creatures. Throughout Tolkien's lore, Gandalf is one of the few outsiders hobbits accept, though many are still dubious. The show slowly builds his relationship with the Harfoots, the ancestors of the hobbits. Wrong in the books, the Harfoots are hobbits. By showing this suspicious society learning to trust the wizard, the series explains his connection with the hobbits generations later. Rings of Power specifically focuses on the friendship with Nori Brandyfoot, Markella Kavanaugh, a mischievous young Harfoot with a thirst for adventure. The description is similar to Frodo Baggins, Elijah Wood, from The Lord of the Rings. Frodo, like the hobbits Bilbo Baggins, Martin Freeman, has a long-standing relationship with Gandalf, played by Ian McKellen in the films, along with Frodo's friends Merry, Dominic Moynihan, and Pippin, Billy Boyd. The Bagginses descend from a long line of adventuring hobbits, and Gandalf is familiar with this family history. It doesn't seem like a leap to think that Nori may be the start of it all, including Gandalf's involvement with the hobbits. By expanding Gandalf's history with the hobbits, or Harfoots, the show makes this interaction with Frodo and Bilbo more impactful, and it explains why Gandalf chose to bring these characters on his journey in the first place. Now, let's let that sink in and marinate just for a second. So, clearly, what they are saying is the Rings of Power will help you get the most that you can from watching Peter Jackson's films, right? Because they are laying the groundwork. According to them, it is not a leap to assume that Bilbo Baggins and Frodo Baggins are the long lost descendants. They are the descendants generations later of one Nori Brandyfoot. That's sort of what they're implying here. And they're implying that the stranger is in fact Gandalf, and how this all makes sense, right? Because this makes sense, right? But okay, let's continue. Elrond's friendship with Durin. Another friendship that gets a lot of time in the show is Elrond's, Robert Armayo, and with Prince Durin IV, Owain Arthur. The friendship between an elf and a dwarf is reminiscent of Legolas, Orlando Bloom, and Gimli, John Rhys Davies, in The Lord of the Rings. But it is more than that, as Elrond interacts with dwarves later in life. Despite the bad blood between the two races, Elrond, Hugo Weaving in the films, welcomes Gimli into his home, as he does with the dwarves in the Hobbit films. In The Hobbit, Thorin Oakenshield, Richard Armitage, and several of the dwarves in his company are descendants of Durin. Gimli comes from this family as well. By exploring Elrond's past friendship with Durin, his later acceptance of the other dwarves, despite the rivalry, is emphasized. It makes his decision to welcome these dwarves into Rivendell much more meaningful, given his connection with their ancestor. Elrond serves a relatively small role in the films, but the show gives him more of a spotlight, effectively growing the character. Giving Elrond a history helps to explain his perspective in The Lord of the Rings, and as the series goes on, it could help the audience understand his resistance to his daughter Arwen's, Liv Tyler's, love for Aragorn, Viggo Mortensen. Okay. Oh, now we're okay. Making Sauron human. Oh, this ought to be good. Once again, the identity of Sauron was a big twist in Rings of Power. While Halbrand, Charlie Vickers, was introduced early, he wasn't revealed to be the Dark Lord until the final episode. Many fans had predictions of who Sauron would be, and many were wrong. Unlike the films, Rings of Power gave Sauron a face, making him human, rather than the evil power in The Lord of the Rings. The show depicts his rise to power, while in Lord of the Rings, he is a sudden threat. He's a sudden threat in Lord of the Rings? What the fuck is even that? In the films, he is a historic evil that most thought to be destroyed. So Rings of Power gives that backstory. The films summarize the events in a prologue, but the show delves into them and offers a deeper explanation of why Sauron is a threat by showing what he's capable of. The show's humanizing of Sauron makes the danger in The Lord of the Rings seem more real to the audience as it gives context to his past. It also shows him interacting with Galadriel, Morfydd Clark in the series. Her initial friendship with Halbrand leads to him tempting her with power when she discovers who he is. And much later, in The Lord of the Rings, Galadriel, Cate Blanchett, is tempted again by the ring. In a moment of weakness, she repeats the words Sauron said to her. Galadriel's refusal to take the ring makes more sense with the context of the series, and it makes her temptation that much more interesting. Connections through Númenórean lore and Khazad-dûm. With Rings of Power serving as a sort of history for the Lord of the Rings, there are plenty of connections through the world's lore. One example is Elendil, Owen, and his son Isildur, Maxim Baldry, who are ancestors of Aragorn. Their story plays directly into the significance of Aragorn becoming the King of Gondor. As the show explores these characters, it will allow more fans to understand the history of it all. Incidentally, these characters and their Numenor blood allow Aragorn to live as long as he does. The show explores Numenor's connections with the Valar and the half-elf Elros, which explains Aragorn's extended lifespan. Rings of Power also shows the history of Khazad-dûm, or Moria as it's referred to in The Lord of the Rings. The show explains Mithril in more detail and explores the origins of the Balrog. Connect or not, the Rings of Power enhances The Lord of the Rings by making the lore more acceptable to a wider audience. These two depictions of Middle-earth complement each other despite not being tied together in any official capacity. The Rings of Power gives a Middle-earth history lesson to those who are unfamiliar with Tolkien's writings, and as such, it strengthens Jackson's interpretation of the world even without a direct link between the two. The end. Okay, for those with sensitive ears, I'll cover them now. This is the biggest bunch of fucking horse shit I have ever read, at least so far doing videos regarding Tolkien stuff. You know where I'll say this article was right? In that very last part of that paragraph where it says, the Rings of Power gives a Middle-earth history lesson to those who are, quote, unfamiliar with Tolkien's writings. And that's the only way this show gives any lessons about Middle-earth, the characters within it, or the lore. Okay? You would have to have not read the books. So if your only point of reference is Peter Jackson's movies, maybe you can make that argument. Otherwise, every single thing that you have said here, every example, whether it be Gandalf, Sauron, Numenor, Elrond, and the dwarves, the hobbits. No, absolutely 100% wrong. This series, the simple fact that it's just so doesn't give a shit about the lore or canon or anything related to the actual work that Tolkien did other than using the names of locations and people. No, I'm sorry. But again, the reason why I read this article and made a video about it here, guys, isn't because I want to just rip into the article for the sake of ripping into the article, right? There's more than enough there. And you know, it is what it is. But the point I wanted to make is this is what I told you guys that they would start to do, right? That they would start to say, well, if you really want to get Tolkien, if you really want to appreciate Tolkien, what you got to do is you got to watch the series. Okay? Because by watching Amazon's series, The Rings of Power, only then can you get the real full impact and the full experience of Peter Jackson's movies, right? Because without The Rings of Power, you're sort of just getting this kind of version from Peter Jackson's movie, but with The Rings of Power. And so it's their way of subverting Peter Jackson's films and his adaptation of The Lord of the Rings, because now what they're trying to do is they're trying to force Rings of Power into that pantheon of Tolkien adaptive or adapted work, and sort of saying that you cannot get the full Tolkien experience without this show. Okay, and that's sort of what they say here, because they even flat out say, I'm looking here at the last sentence, said it strengthens Jackson's interpretation of the world, meaning Tolkien's world of Middle Earth. So the Rings of Power is what was needed to strengthen Peter Jackson's adaptation of The Lord of the Rings. And that's what this whole article, that is supposed to be the takeaway from this article, is that if you really want to get that Lord of the Rings experience, you got to watch The Rings of Power. Despite the fact that The Rings of Power doesn't know their ass from their elbow when it comes to sticking to the lore. But it doesn't matter. because we're saying that this is now the third banner in that triumvirate. You know what I mean, damn it. I can't believe I lost the word in mid sentence. You know, in that, Jesus Christ, in that pantheon, I'm going to go with pantheon, right? Because it's a much easier word. The triumvirate, God damn it. Out of those three pillars, right? There's Tolkien's books, right? And then there's the Peter Jackson adaptation. Now they're saying, no, that's not good enough. You need Rings of Power in order to really get the whole thing, because the Rings of Power elevates Peter Jackson's adaptation and makes it worth watching. And this is sort of where I said that they were going to go at some point, that we were going to get here, where there's no longer a separation of, well, there's Tolkien's written literary work, right? And then there's the adaptations of it, whether it be the Bakshi animations or Peter Jackson's films. But now they're saying, no, you absolutely must, if you wish to have the most Tolkien-esque experience possible from Peter Jackson's movies, you need to watch The Rings of Power. Because to just watch Peter Jackson's movies on their own, you're not getting the full experience, which goes to what I had said, how they would get to the point where they would tear down and try to diminish Peter Jackson's films in order to make space for the Rings of Power. And this article says it right there. They spell it out for you. This is exactly what they're going to do. And again, a lot of the things that, according to them, it is quite possible that Frodo Baggins and Bilbo Baggins, those characters created by Tolkien, could actually be the descendants of Nori Brandyfoot, created by Pain and Decay. So Tolkien, unbeknownst to him, when writing this in throughout the 20th century, the Rings of Power actually is where it all starts. Didn't start with Tolkien. Didn't start with The Hobbit. Okay, it actually starts with the Rings of Power. So let's get it right, people. Let's get the chronology right. Okay, the very first Tolkien work was Rings of Power, apparently, because that's the hobbits grew out of the character Nori Brandyfoot, Gandalf, his relationship with the hobbits. That's where we get all that from. Forget the fact that that old white guy wrote all those books where he explained all these things and all these histories and stuff like that. Fuck that. Nobody needs that shit. I mean, he's white. He's a man. We don't need to pay attention to that crap. Go with the show. Go with Rings of Power. Rings of Power is your only valid source if you really want to understand the history of Middle Earth and all the characters in it. And that's the argument that they're making, and that's the argument that I said they were eventually going to make, is that they are inseparable, right? The Peter Jackson films, Tolkien's literary work itself, and the Rings of Power are now inseparable. And that's where they've been trying to take this all along. And we're just going to see it get worse. I promise you, as we get closer to 2024, when I guess season 2 is going to come out, the lead up to it, you will just see it get worse. But, that's just my take. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you think that they said the quiet part out loud, right? That they're already trying to make it so that you can't, quote unquote, do Tolkien without doing Rings of Power? Do you think that they were, a little quick on the trigger there and maybe shot their wad a little too soon, so to speak? Or do you think at this point they just don't care? They're just like, listen, this is the way it's going to be, and you're just going to deal with it. Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Remember, if you like the video, like the video. If you feel like sharing the video, by all means, feel free to do so. It gets it seen by more people. If you have not subscribed, I would hope that you would consider giving the channel your subscription, because we are trying to build this thing and make it grow, and that would be awesome if you would consider. And if you have subscribed, thank you very much for returning. I hope that you guys are having an awesome build up to the holidays, whatever holidays you celebrate. for me, it's going to be the Christmas holidays is right around the corner here. So what I may do is I may wind up doing the weekly roundup on Friday as opposed to Saturday. Like I normally would do it Saturday or Sunday, but seeing as how Sunday is Christmas Day and Saturday is Christmas Eve, I may not be able to do it on the weekend, so I may wind up doing it on Friday. But I'll let you guys know. You guys got some great comments in the comment section, so I look forward to doing that. All right, guys, remember, be good, be safe, be awesome, and until next time, peace.